But I wanted to talk really more about your original training as a death doula. So maybe you could just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about that.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's really a delight to have this conversation. Um, I like to say that my path has been absolutely organic. It's just been um, taking each step, really following the signs within myself and the signs out in the world, and listening to that. So nothing has been planned ahead of time. Um, so as you mentioned, I'm a death doula. First, I'll explain what that is and then talk a little bit about my journey. So, a doula, and there are doulas on the birth side and the death side, um, essentially is someone who non medically and holistically supports people through these life transitions of birth and death. That on the death side, which is the side I know better, that could mean anything from sitting bedside and kind of non religious, spiritual, emotional support. It could also mean practical affairs, helping families deal with the bureaucracy of an end of life, an illness, and a death. Um, and it could also be creative, supporting people in creating legacy projects that they want to pass on to their loved ones, designing funerals and memorial services. Um, and kind of more philosophically and bigger picture, I see the role of a doula as really supporting people in finding agency again in these life transitions. Because for the last, especially the last 100 years, in places like the US, where I'm from, and the UK, where I am now, birth and death both have been medicalized and institutionalized and kind of left in the hands of the experts and professionals, who have amazing roles to play, but we have forgotten that we have the innate knowledge and wisdom to take care of our loved ones in these transitions. So the role of a doula is really to remind people that and hold space for people to find that again and take care of one another. In my training, I heard that a lot of death doulas get asked this really tender question while sitting bedside by a loved one. Am I allowed to touch my loved one? And yes, of course, we actually know how to be tender with one another, but we've forgotten and we've even become scared of things like the human body. And then finally, what I'll say about the role of a doula is I see this work as very much connected to justice movements around the world, because I believe if we find our own agency, we can't help but want agency for all people everywhere. And so I see it as intricately linked to activism work and to kind of this conversation of, yes, death is natural, but a lot of the ways that people are dying right now and always are very unnatural and at the hands of oppression and violence. And so, how do we have that conversation of what is a good death? Who has access to one? What is a death in which we can find our dignity and agency back? So that's kind of the role of a doula. And then I'll say from my own journey. So I experienced the death of my father when I was 18, very suddenly. And my family, for various reasons, was just not in a position to be able to or to have the tools to speak about it. And then I, at 18, 19, my peers and I didn't have the language for it. I don't know if I even had the words like grief or a mourning period or anything. So I navigated the aftermath of my dad's death fairly emotionally isolated, and also geographically isolated from those who knew him in his life, because I moved across the US to start university. So this, of course, made me so attuned to how difficult it is to speak about death in predominant culture, again, in the US and in the UK. And so I realized I would, 6, 7 years on after university, it was almost like I was holding this secret in. I would know someone, be friends with someone for a year and a half, and they still didn't know my dad had died. So I was actually hiding a part of my identity because I was, subconsciously believing that my stuff was too heavy for anyone to hold. And so I went on this journey of being able to speak about death, which then around the 10-year anniversary of my dad's death included taking the training to become a death doula. And then through that, realizing that creating space, holding space for other people to speak about death, dying, and grief was something I was passionate about. So I started hosting death dinners, which are facilitated gatherings with strangers, speaking about our personal relationship to mortality over a nourishing home-cooked meal. And through that, realized I'd love to do this with families. And so in a moment of serendipity, as often life is, I had been thinking, I'd love to take a conflict resolution training. And I just happened that week to be connected with a new friend who said, I'm starting a training in the new year and applications are closing this week. And that was the dialogue roadmap. And so I just had a conversation with you and took that leap. And now I'm building a practice at that intersection of dialogue, mediation, conflict facilitation, and end of life grief and bereavement training to support families and individuals in navigating conversations around end of life.